Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where climate change is the only news fit to print. And had an interesting discussion today, political discussion with somebody from Texas who was clearly a conservative, but not a total, not in the way that you might think. He was actually quite successful. He was a successful businessman. He was originally from California, et cetera, et cetera. He seemed fairly open-minded about some things, but then he was like, what's the most important issue to you these days in the political landscape? And I was like, climate change. And he was like, oh, just, I don't know. And it was a conversation killer. He kind of asked me a few questions about it, but he didn't really have much to add to the mix. I couldn't really tell whether he was a climate denier or a climate change denier, or a climate is a natural, it's a natural thing, and climate's always changing. Whatever. He didn't really go into giving me his standpoint, but it was definitely a conversation killer. After I got slightly in depth about talking about climate change, it just trailed off the conversation. I put on my sunglasses and I was like, check. Because that's generally where it goes with most people who are not willing to have a frank and honest discussion about what's really going on. What's really going on is stuff like this. Utah's extreme drought prompts a state of emergency. According to the U.S. Drought Monitor, every county in the Beehive State is experiencing some type of drought condition. Water levels at 16 of the 49 major Utah reservoirs are below 20%. Lake Powell is only half full. Half. An extreme drought that depleted half of Utah's reservoirs had prompted Governor Gary Herbert to declare a state of emergency. The declaration allows drought-affected communities, agricultural producers, and others to begin the process of accessing state or federal resources, according to a press release. The rainfall we have received helps, but the drought is at a level unseen for many years and will not be solved with a small series of storms. In some areas, the drought is at or near historic levels. The declaration comes on the heels of the state's driest year on record, according to NOAA. The U.S. Drought Monitor noted that every county in the Beehive State is experiencing some level of drought conditions. Snowpack was at a record low last winter, and water levels at 16 of the 49 major Utah reservoirs are currently below 20%. 8 of those are below 5%. The extended drought has hit tourism. Lake Powell, a popular recreational site, is only half full, and Gunnison and Paiute reservoirs are nearly empty. The drought has even forced ranchers to sell livestock because of a loss of winter and summer pastures. We can't control precipitation, but we can find opportunities to decrease our water use all year long. Styler said. Who is Styler? Sorry, I missed that whole part, but no, we're not going to worry about it. If we all look at for opportunities to conserve, we can keep a lot more water in our reservoirs, which will really help if we have another dry winter. Will it? That is alarming. Moving on to this article from The Ecologist from 2 days ago by Frederick Simon. Global carbon emissions to hit new record. International Energy Agency chief says chance of meeting targets of the Paris Agreement are getting weaker and weaker. Global carbon emissions will rise to a new record level in 2018, making the chances of reaching a target to keep temperature increases to 1.5 or 2C weaker and weaker every year, every month. the head of the International Energy Agency, has said. Faith Birol told a conference in Paris that the data for the first 9 months of the year was already pointing to a record increase in carbon emissions. A United Nations report last week said society would have to make deep changes to how it consumes energy, travels, and builds to meet a lower global warming target. Global emissions would need to peak soon after 2020 and decline sharply afterwards in order to keep temperature rise within 1.5 C or 2 C, said a report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Sorry, I have very bad news. My numbers are giving me some despair, Birol told the conference at the Polish embassy in Paris on Wednesday. Poland will host United Nations COP24 talks in December, which will lay out a rule book to implement a historic accord reached in Paris in 2015. That agreement sets goals to phase out fossil fuel use this century, shift towards cleaner energies, and help limit a rise in temperatures. Looking at data for the first 9 months of this year, emissions this year will increase once again. Global emissions will reach a record historical high, Birol said. Therefore, the chances of reaching such ambitious targets, in my view, are becoming weaker and weaker every year, every month. Aspirational limit. While renewables have been growing strongly, their growth isn't large enough to reverse CO2 emission trends. We need more renewables in all end uses, including more bioenergy, more energy efficiency, and a range of other technologies and fuel sources to correct this course. Referring to the IPCC report released earlier this month, Birol underscored the critical role of bioenergy to limit global temperature rises. Really? Bioenergy? And the more they talk about it, the less they seem to understand what climate change, what's actually happening. The share of bioenergy in total renewable consumption globally is about 50% today, as much as hydro, wind, solar, or all other renewables combined, the IEA said in a report published earlier this month. In transport, the IPCC's integrated assessment indicates that biofuels will need to rise 260% by 2030 and 750% by 2050 in order to keep global warming within the 1.5 C aspirational limit of the Paris Agreement. Bioenergy is the overlooked giant of the renewables energy field. Really? Jesus, this is where, you know, that meme where Superman is slapping Batman. Pow! No, that's not it. Try again. This is from The Guardian, from the 19th, by Art Cullen. Politicians say nothing, but U.S. farmers are increasingly terrified by it. Climate change. Research forecasts Iowa corn yields could drop in half within the next half century thanks to extreme weather, yet it's not part of the political conversation. Farmers around here are itching to go after the amber wave of soya beans, but there was that 5 inches of rain a couple of weeks ago and then 7 inches of rain, and it drives even the retired guys batty. Those beans aren't worth much at the elevator thanks to a Trump trade war with China, but they're worth even less getting wet feet in a pond that was a field which the glacier made a prairie bog some 14,000 years ago until we came along and drained it. This year, crops in northwest Iowa are looking spotty. Up into Minnesota, they were battered by spring storms and late planting and then inundated again late summer. Where they aren't washed out, they're weedy or punky. If you go south in the Buena Vista County, where I live in Storm Lake, the corn stands tall and firm. Welcome to climate change, Iowa style. It's the least debated issue of the midterm political season. And yeah, that's the other thing. The other thing I was explaining to that guy was that climate change is the lowest rung on the ladder of either party's. I mean, I don't know. You hear Democrats talk more about climate change, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've heard a couple say like, we really need to do something, but it's just so weak. It's as weak, or if not weaker, than this IPCC crap. The weather is the top topic of conversation at any cooperative's elevators coffee table, along with the markets. Everyone knows that things have been changing in sweeping ways out here on the richest corn ground in the world. It's drought in the spring and floods in the fall. What were considered 500-year floods in Cedar Rapids and Des Moines 30 years ago are now considered 100-year floods. Iowa has been getting soggier in spring and fall, with scary dry spells interspersed, and more humid at night by as much as a third since 1980. Everyone knows it's been getting wetter and weirder, especially Dr. Gene Tackle, a Nobel Prize-winning climate scientist at Iowa State University. Tackle predicted 20 years ago the floods we see today, including linking it to climate change, already linking it to climate change back then. Farmers just saw ponding and called the tiling company to install more. We're on our way to doubling the size. Is it tiling company or tilling company? I don't know. We're on our way to doubling the size of the northern Iowa drainage system in the past 30 years as the upper Midwest has grown more humid and extreme. The drainage system is delivering runoff rich in farm fertilizer to the Mississippi River complex and the Gulf of Mexico, where the nitrate from the Iowa and Illinois cornfields is growing a dead zone the size of New Jersey. Yay, the shrimping industry is being deprived of oxygen, so Iowa farmers can chase 200 bushels of corn per acre and hope against hope that corn somehow increase in price as we plow up every last acre and use it for biofuels. That flow also is creating a toxic source for Des Moines Waterworks, which is facing up to $100 million in improvements to remove agricultural chemicals from the Raccoon River that supplies 500,000 thirsty denizens. The waterworks sued our county over it, along with two others, but a federal judge threw out the case because you simply can't sue an Iowa drainage district, and that means that there is no way to regulate agriculture as it responds to extreme weather and market consolidation that seeks immediate return. Me sense a problem. Meanwhile, those huge rainfalls on exposed black dirt wash it to the vales. Even from the flat ground of our neighborhood, we are losing soil at 2 to 3 tons an acre a year. Nature can regenerate the soil at only a half a ton a year, so we are washing our black gold down the river 4 or 6 times faster than we can regrow it. Because we have less soil, the corn and soybeans are starting to show it in lower protein in the kernel or pod. Corn is yielding higher starch content, notes agronomist Dr. Rick Cruz of Iowa State. He adds that wheat production in China is falling because of degraded soil wrought by extreme weather and poor stewardship. It follows that overall corn yields, or at least relative value for the most used crop in the world, will decline. Here, this year, we see it in variable crop yields from township to township. It is starting to factor into land prices, which is the foundational wealth of the upper Midwest and especially in Iowa. The University of Minnesota forecasts, based on research at NASA, that Iowa corn yields could drop in half within the next half century because of extreme weather and soil depletion. Yet nobody is talking about it. We expect that the chemists and geneticists will handle it and keep those yields ramping up come hell or high water. Down in Kansas, they are resigned to the fact that the water will be gone sooner rather than later. The high plains are locked in drought. You used to run a calf on 40 acres of prairie grass. Now it takes 100. Depending on the source, you will hear that the Ogallala Aquifer, slaking the huge cattle feedlots from Amarillo to Dodge City, will be drunk dry in as few as 20 years. It's down to 150 feet at Dodge City since 1950. The Ogallala can't take much of a recharge there, and the demand on the rivers is just as great. Everyone acknowledges that those cattle will just move to another area. Said Don Blankenau, an attorney for the state of Nebraska, in its compact with Kansas that regulates the Republican River from which cattle and corn irrigators draw from ever lower flows. But it's not a part of the political conversation per se. Nobody is talking about climate change in their campaigns or the implications for food production near term, or how water will be handled in fast-changing conditions. It is one of those electric rails because so much money is wrapped up in the corn, ethanol, meat, soya, bean complex as it stands. Farmers are taking action on their own after losing money 6 straight years in Iowa and wondering where the corn ethanol bubble of 2008 went. They are starting to look into cover crops like rye to protect the soil and hold nutrients in place during these increasingly harsh flushes. They also can help store moisture by building soil tilth to ward off dry spells, which could span decades. You have flavors of the dust bowl, Tackle said, sprinkled by torrents in the future. Another soil scientist, Jerry Hatfield of the National Lab for Agriculture and the Environment in Ames, told my reporter son, Tom, that we can make agriculture resilient to a changing climate, but it will take a transformation in thinking that is not yet reflected in the political conversation. Few politicians in the 5 states around here are talking about regulating agriculture in an era of warmer and wetter nights and long droughts. Yet farmers are paying attention. Hatfield says that the conventional producers in the Raccoon River watershed are starting to focus on profitability reports from sustainable agriculture groups like the Practical Farmers of Iowa. They advocate a rotating crop livestock land use with more diverse plantings that can restore soil and make farmers more resilient and get them off that expensive chemical Jones, because the government doesn't appear equipped to deal with it. The state of Iowa and the state of Ohio each spend about $1 per acre a year on water and soil quality on land that costs up to $10,000 per acre. Politicians are still talking bioswales and mini marshes when we all need to be thinking at least about retiring a third of the land in the upper Midwest from corn and soy rotations. That isn't something that the ag supply chain controlled by the Koch brothers, Bayer Monsanto, and Dow DuPont can readily accept, because to give up acres is to give up revenue, and they happen to control the political infrastructure in the Corn Belt. But at some point, the construct fails. In western Kansas, they're having a tough time growing corn, even with irrigation and chemicals. So you make a choice, or the choice is made for you. It is getting so warm that the plant simply cannot service itself. Without more urgency, the problems will continue to grow worse than soybeans standing in 6 inches of water waiting on a combine to sweep them up. The fellows around the coffee maker know it, and so do the people down in Des Moines trying to make a safe cup of coffee along with Amarillo ranchers. The politicians just haven't caught up. And that is really scary, of course, because y'all can see where that's going. And to finish up this video, I want to read this article from Truthout, The Complex and Frustrating Reality of Recycling Plastic. This is by Mary Mazzoni from October 17th. Global consumers now use 1 million plastic bottles every minute, 91% of which are not recycled. Our growing consumption of single-use plastic is evident in the form of ever-expanding landfills, as well as pollution on our sidewalks, along roadways, and in natural ecosystems. Plastic that is littered or blown out of waste bins makes its way into storm drains, streams, and rivers. Ultimately, up to 8 million metric tons of it enter the world's oceans every year. Scientists aren't sure how long it takes for plastic to fully biodegrade. Estimates range from 450 years to never. National Geographic reported in its June issue, which is devoted to the mounting plastic pollution problem. But we know enough to know that the staggering 9.2 billion metric tons of plastic produced since the 1950s isn't going anywhere anytime soon. At this rate, our oceans will contain more plastic than fish by 2050. Many now consider ocean plastic pollution an existential threat on par with climate change, but it seems like it should be an easy one to fix. Plastic is recyclable after all, so why can't we just recycle it? It turns out it's not as simple as it sounds. Around 2/3 of the plastic that enters the ocean from rivers is carried by only 20 waterways, the majority of which are on the Asian continent, where access to waste collection and recycling is often limited. Even in the countries with established waste management infrastructure, the picture remains bleak. Less than 10% of the plastic used in the United States is recycled, according to the most recent Environmental Protection Agency data. Yeah, I know that because even even well-educated, liberal, conscious, progressive. I just see people like, I mean, some people do it, but a lot of people are just like, it all goes in the garbage. They don't give, they don't give, they don't give a hoot. They just want to pollute. Figures improve for the select plastic materials. For example, around 30% of polyethylene terephthalate, commonly used to package household staples like bottled beverages, condiments, and personal care products, is recycled. But even these rates remain woefully out of balance with our increasing reliance on single-use plastic. To make matters worse, fluctuating demand for recycled material and consumer confusion about what is recyclable makes it harder for the U.S. collection programs to remain economical. If nothing changes, municipal recycling programs across the country may be forced to scale back or even shut down, hastening our collision course with a new paradigm defined by toxic seas. Grim reality begs the question, how can developing markets, which now produce roughly half of the world's plastic, hope to establish effective recycling infrastructures if countries like the U.S. are still unable to get it right? What's holding us back from recycling more plastic? And what can we do to save our oceans before it's too late? The cost of confusion. For decades, PR campaigns and public service announcements touted the ease of recycling. Just move your hand over a few inches, spokesman after spokesman said, and throw that plastic, metal, or paper into the recycling bin instead of the trash. The reality of recycling is far more complicated. Even in nations like the US, where curbside programs have steadily proliferated since 1980. I got an idea. It just came to me. Because it's kind of like, it's kind of like voluntary seatbelts, right? If they made seatbelt wearing voluntary, people would be like, seatbelts, but they don't. It's against the law to drive without your seatbelt on. So what if they, how about a big ass fine for throwing plastic in your garbage can? How about that? It wouldn't be really hard to spot. I understand that would be, obviously you're checking everybody's garbage. But let's say you have an inspector come out, like not the garbage man, but you have somebody just, it doesn't have to be every week. They come out once a month. They look in your stuff. There's like, is there recycling in here? Is there, if there is, big ass fine, make it huge, make it really huge, make it $1,000 or whatever, $500, something gigantic. Hurt people into doing it. Like, do it, because you get a ticket for not wearing a seatbelt, and everybody wears a seatbelt. Like, people just wear seatbelts. It's automatic now. Like, you're a super rebel if you don't wear a seatbelt. You're also a dumbass. And you should be just as much of a dumbass for not recycling. If you don't recycle, whatever. Anyways, back to this article. Neighboring communities can have vastly different recycling programs, and educational campaigns that hinge on industry jargon often do little to ease confusion for residents. Most people have the attitude that if they just put it in the blue bin, it will get taken away and somebody will figure out what to do with it. But putting something in the blue bin and actually recycling it are two very different things, said David Biderman, CEO and Executive Director of the Solid Waste Association of North America. Motivated by good intentions, people throw everything from plastic shopping bags to garden hoses into their curbside carts. That also is a huge problem, and I see that happening all the time. According to Biderman, on average, 10 to 15% of the material sent to U.S. recycling centers is not recyclable, and it eventually makes its way to local landfills. You may divert material on the front end, but it's still going to a landfill on the back end. Meanwhile, someone is getting paid to do that processing. The results of widespread confusion can be prohibitively expensive for municipalities. So if you find the living crap out of people for not recycling, they're going to learn real quick what's recyclable and what's not. They're going to figure it out. They're going to get real smart about it. They're going to wake up in the morning and go, gee, I need to recycle today. And guess what? That's, cities should be salivating over the revenue possibilities of that. Salivating. Scooby-Doo. I probably just gave somebody a really good idea. If miscellaneous materials are not sorted out, or if containers are contaminated by food waste residue, the quality of the bulk scrap drops, and so does the price it will fetch on the open market. The landscape is complicated even further by the wide variety of plastics now used to package foods, beverages, and other household goods. Packaging manufacturers increasingly favor more lightweight plastics which carry their own benefits. Namely, opting for lighter weight packaging means a manufacturer uses less plastic and can ship more product in a smaller amount of space, cutting down on transportation-related emissions. But lightweight plastics are often not recyclable, even though they appear to be, and more of them are entering the recycling stream. The goal of a recycling program is to generate saleable material. Paper, plastic, and metal can only be sold into the marketplace if it satisfies certain standards. What about glass? I know glass is heavy, but it's what's beautiful about glass is it's easily recyclable. It's easily identifiable. Why not require certain standards of require certain standards of packaging? You must use this plastic because it is easily recyclable, because we want to be able to recycle it. Or how about no plastic at all? I'm up for that. No plastic at all. But on the brink of a disaster, on a partly cloudy afternoon in May, recycling haulers and processors from across California converged on the Capitol building to warn lawmakers about a recycling crisis. That's May, that's this year. U.S. recyclers process around 66 million tons of material every year, a third of which is exported. Until recently, China was the largest purchaser of bulk plastic, paper, and other recyclable materials leaving the United States, but new regulations have recycling programs on the brink of disaster, the haulers said. At the start of the year, in an attempt to reduce local environmental problems associated with the handling of over 45 million tons of foreign waste annually, China imposed what some call an impossible purity standard on imported recyclables. Mixed paper and plastics found to have more than 0.50% foreign material by weight are rejected, and barges are forced to return to the United States or ship their loads to other ports, mostly elsewhere in Asia, where they are sold at a lower price. We have a major challenge right now because the largest export market for American recyclables has basically been shut off, Biderman said. India, Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia have ramped up some of their imports of American recyclables, but it's still less than half of what China is taking. The shift comes as relatively low oil prices make it cheaper to produce plastics from virgin material, further decreasing demand for recycled feedstocks. Plastic prices are down across the board, Biderman told us. Material is moving in most instances, but it's moving at very low prices. California haulers are pushing for dramatic policy changes to help them adapt and told lawmakers they must do more to educate consumers about what is recyclable, but they aren't the only ones feeling the pinch. At the start of May, Portland, Oregon, was forced to raise its waste hauling rates for the first time in 5 years as it struggles to find new buyers for bulk plastics and other materials. Portland haulers transport recyclables to regional depots where they are sorted, baled, and prepared for export. In years past, the modest fees they received helped to offset hauling costs for residents. The falling prices are leaving haulers in the red. It hinges on the broader lack of recycling markets. Bruce Walker, Portland's solid waste and recycling program manager, said of the rate increase. The contamination issue is not solely responsible. There's a vast oversupply of recyclables in the U.S. right now. So if you're looking at supply and demand, that contributes to lower prices, but contamination certainly plays a role, Walker said. Residents can help the program by keeping non-recyclable materials out, but it's difficult to get that message across with so many very similar types of plastic that enter the household. The role of corporations in the United States: the cost of recycling plastic and other household waste falls on cities and their taxpayers. But as municipal programs seek new buyers for bulk scrap, many wonder whether the companies that produce single-use packaging should bear more responsibility for recycling it. For too long, packaging companies have been externalizing the cost of their packaging on local governments. All of this can be solved with Regulations, right? Of course, we live in a anti-regulation type situation right now, but you regulate what plastics are used by the companies making them, using the plastics. You legislate and regulate the fact that they must use, a majority of recycled products in their thing. You create a circular loop for this. You find people for not recycling. You make sure they know what the recycling is the right thing to recycle, so you lessen the burden on the haulers. You just mandate that this loop happens. Very simple. See, I figured it out. Walker agreed, underscoring the power of U.S. companies to take financial heat off municipal recycling programs. I'm sure that the fossil fuel industries are in there somewhere saying, no, don't do this. I'm positive. Walker agreed, underscoring the power of U.S. companies to take the financial heat off municipal recycling programs. If American manufacturers and brand owners are willing to package products using recycled materials, we would be in a much better situation. Unfortunately, those commitments aren't readily apparent, so mandate it. It's beginning to change, or find the companies for, give them a tariff. How about that? That's beginning to change, albeit slowly. Launched in 2003, the Recycling Partnership uses funding from companies like PepsiCo and Starbucks to improve municipal recycling infrastructure. It tests contamination reduction and other best practices in the field with partner cities such as Atlanta, Chicago, and Denver, and makes them available to communities across the country. Last year, it joined the Association of Plastic Recyclers to get companies more actively involved. Their campaign, dubbed Recycling Demand Champions, asks companies to recognize that the demand for recycled plastic is vital to the health of U.S. recycling programs, calls on them to purchase more of the material. Top brands like Target, Procter & Gamble, Campbell Soup Company, and Coca-Cola signed on to the initiative and pledged to use more recycled plastic, primarily to replace virgin material in industrial items like trash cans, pallets, and tote boxes. This type of application is typical for plastic. Unlike other materials such as aluminum and glass, plastic is downcycled far more often than it's used for new bottles or other containers. So while initiatives like this can help recyclers make ends meet and ensure less plastic goes to landfill, they do little to stem the demand for virgin plastic in the packaging. Some companies are going even further. French bottled water giant Evian, for example, plans to use 100% recycled plastic bottles by 2025. Yay, Evian. One of the most aggressive corporate goals on record. Meanwhile, others are looking beyond plastic for products and packaging. UK supermarket chain Iceland will become the world's first supermarket to eliminate single-use plastic in its branded products within 5 years. Home delivery startup 3Main says its cleaning products packaged in aluminum bottles will eliminate more than 80% of the plastic associated with home cleaning. Thank you, 3Main. I've never heard of them, but how very awesome. Even toy company Lego may start making its iconic building blocks from sugarcane instead of plastic. Thank you, Lego. This is all positive, but businesses can do more, and their stakeholders are letting them know it. In response to the mounting protests from NGOs, Coca-Cola pledged to collect and recycle 100% of its packaging by 2030. Though Greenpeace says the company is still dodging the main issue of its increasing plastic use and pledged to keep the pressure on. Earlier this year, a group of 25 institutional investors with a combined $1 trillion in assets called plastic pollution a clear corporate brand risk and said they will engage consumer goods companies to fight the problem. Beginning with PepsiCo, Nestle, Procter & Gamble, and Unilever, shareholder pressure also swayed McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts to move away from polystyrene cups. In announcing victory in the foam cup fight, the shareholder advocacy group As You Sow declared shareholders stopping the flow of plastics at the source, giant global corporations. Shareholders are stopping the flow of plastics at the source. What can you do? Or what you can do, excuse me. I'm having really a hard time reading today. Cities across the country are taking action to clean up their recycling streams and preserve the viability of their programs. California instituted a statewide ban on plastic carryout bags in 2016, and cities from Chicago and Boston to Austin, Texas have their own bag bans on the books. A handful of cities, including Portland, Minneapolis, and Washington, D.C., ban foam takeout containers. New York City may soon be the latest to ban plastic drinking straws, joining the likes of Seattle, Miami Beach, and Malibu, California. As with any other issue, citizens who are concerned about plastic waste and recycling can contact their representatives and voice support for similar legislation. Although bans alone can't solve the problem, how many items are we going to have to ban? Walker asked rhetorically. That's not a comprehensive approach either, though in my opinion, there needs to be some consideration in other cities with respect to these items that pose problems to the recycling system. Even if you feel you know what is recyclable in your community, take the time to visit your local recycling program's website and review the list of accepted materials. Make sure all recyclable materials are clean and dry before placing them in a bin to avoid contributing to the contamination. For materials that are not accepted curbside, use third-party searches like Earth 911 or Recycle Nation to find drop-off or mail-back recycling options near you. If your community has yet to establish a curbside program, anyways, I had a joke there, probably not appropriate. You're living in the wrong community. Or if you live, work, or attend school at complexes that do not provide recycling, step up to make your voice heard. Connect with waste management companies that service your area and contact political representatives, as well as your local solid waste service director and staff, advised John Johnston, retired EPA program leader who now sits on the board of the environmental nonprofit Keep America Beautiful. Beyond a push for legislation, the plastic problem calls for individuals to take personal ownership of how they contribute. Single-use plastics are a convenience, but at a resource cost, said Lucas Mariacher, zero waste coordinator for the city of Phoenix. The goal should always be to minimize waste disposal by reducing resource consumption and reusing resources. Recycling really should be the last resort. Indeed. Wise words. Very true. Well said. The bottom line is recycling enough to stem the tide of plastic entering our oceans, not by a long shot, but a massive problem like plastic pollution requires a multi-pronged approach that includes source, reduction, reuse, and recycling, and we need everyone from governments and companies to individuals in the game. I would caution you against expecting or wishing that there be a recycling market for everything, said Robert Reed, spokesperson for San Francisco's recycling and compost collection company, Recology. Consistent advice from environmentalists is refuse single-use plastics. Refuse plastic straws. Yes, that's very simple. No straw. Thank you very much. No plastic forks in my takeout order. Thank you very much. Just, don't get the drink that comes with the combo, right? Just like take that entire, all that plastic in the straw and the drink and all that, like take all that just out of the whole system. Bring your own water, blah, 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 blah. Bring your own thermos with your own drink in it. Bring your own coffee cup with your own coffee in it. It's very simple. Some people who are really awesome and progressive, they bring those cool little lunch tins, like they have in India, where everybody brings their own lunch in their cool little metal lunch tins. You just bring your own stuff. You don't have to go to Chick-fil-A or whatever bullshit fast food nastiness that is so easy to get. The consistent advice from environmentalists is refuse single-use plastics, refuse plastic straws, carry a metal water bottle, refuse plastic water bottles. Refuse is the new R word. It also spells refuse. That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time.